A man sits alone in a fluorescent-lit hotel room that smells like disinfectant and broken promises. The synthetic perfume and desperation still cling to stale sheets. 20 minutes ago, he traded cash for flesh, for borrowed heat, for rented presence. Now, the silence screams. No satisfaction. Only a hollow ache expanding in his chest like hunger feeding on itself. The emptiness doesn't diminish, it multiplies, demanding more before the sweat has even dried. Cut to another scene. A trader who just turned millions on a single bet. Champagne fizzes, colleagues applaud. Dopamine spikes through his neural pathways. He raises his glass like a conquered king, and already his brain is calculating the next risk, the next high. Victory tastes like ash before he swallows. Most ordinary of all, you, fork suspended over a plate still heavy with food, already plotting dessert while your mouth is full. 3 different bodies, 3 different hungers, one identical pattern. The moment you feed the craving, it doesn't die, it breeds. Foucault understood what most never see. This isn't accident, it's architecture. The machine of endless craving wasn't born with your smartphone notifications. It emerged the moment powerful hands discovered that flesh, conquest, belonging, validation could be weaponized as instruments of submission. They learned to turn your biology against you, transforming survival instincts into psychological shackles. Your hunger to consume, to feel, to dominate, to matter, corrupted into chains. Not broken chains that you could see and break, but invisible restraints woven from your own biology, because a satisfied body might still rebel. But a body locked in perpetual hunger, trained to mistake craving for living, will crawl forever toward the next dose. They don't need dungeons or shackles. They don't need threats or force. They just architect what you crave. They study your neural pathways like engineers study blueprints, then design experiences that trigger the exact chemical cascades that keep you returning, begging, paying. And here's the sentence they never want you to decode. Your desire isn't broken. It's their most elegant control mechanism. What you call appetite, they call leverage. What you call passion, they call programming. There's a way to dismantle this system from within, but it doesn't begin with resistance. It begins with seeing the entire mechanism operating beneath your skin, no matter how it unsettles you. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Foucault saw what most people still refuse to see. Power doesn't merely restrain you, it manufactures what you crave. We've been conditioned to imagine control as cages, as visible bars and brutal locks. But the most sophisticated form of dominance isn't the prison you can see. It's the one you construct inside yourself, built from hungers you never consciously chose. Throughout history, every empire has mastered this technology. Rome perfected bread and circuses, spectacles drenched in blood and wine so the masses would forget their shackles while cheering. Feudal kingdoms calculated precisely how much to feed their peasants. Enough to keep them laboring on land they'd never possess, never enough to dream of escape. Modern governments, corporations, and algorithms haven't abandoned this blueprint. They've engineered it to surgical precision. The instruments have evolved, but the biological levers remain identical. Cheap abundance that renders your body sluggish and your mind foggy. Sex weaponized into markets so vast they devour intimacy entirely. Chemical dependencies, from substances to dopamine, triggering applications, architected to bypass conscious resistance, and an endless carnival of status competitions calibrated so you never stop running toward horizons that retreat with every step. They don't starve you into compliance, they gorge you into submission. Foucault understood that discipline and pleasure aren't opposing forces. They're synchronized gears in one machine. Discipline keeps you productive during working hours. Pleasure keeps you sedated during your supposed freedom. The same system that demands your labor rewards you with carefully metered doses of satisfaction that never quite satisfy. The outcome? Populations that mistake satiation for liberation, consumption for authentic choice. Masses convinced they're pursuing personal dreams while running predetermined circuits inside mazes designed to exhaust their will. Each generation believes they've discovered new freedoms while repeating the same patterns of controlled desire. If you think this concerns your smartphone or social media algorithms, you're not excavating deep enough. This machinery predates technology by millennia. This is the fundamental architecture of control itself, camouflaged in whatever pleasures your particular era worships. And to dismantle it, you must recognize the chains for what they truly are. Not iron and steel, but desire itself, programmed, targeted, and deployed against your own consciousness like a weapon you're trained to love. Every chain serves the same purpose, not to freeze you in place, but to keep you circling the same fire until you've forgotten there's a world beyond its light. The disguises change with each era, yet the gravitational pull remains eternal. In ancient Rome, nights of intoxication and flesh, the bacchanals, were orchestrated by the elite as pressure valves for restless masses. Today, the same mechanism lives in the global pornography industry, in high-definition pixels that replace human warmth and train your nervous system to confuse novelty with intimacy. It's architected so the hunger never ends, because the stimulation is calibrated never to satisfy. Hunger itself has been transformed into commodity. What once signaled mortal danger now gets manufactured in sterile factories. Processed abundance, sugar, salt, fat, engineered to hijack the brain's satiety circuits entirely. You're no longer eating for survival. You're feeding a supply chain that has mapped exactly how to keep you returning, craving, purchasing. The same game operates with power and status. From royal courts where titles were currency to corporate hierarchies and digital leaderboards, the symbols have mutated, but the magnetic pull remains identical. Crowns, corner offices, follower counts, all marketed as proof of worth. Yet symbols are never the substance itself, so the pursuit never terminates. Even belonging has been weaponized against you. Tribes once formed for collective survival. Now they're engineered to capture psychological loyalty. Fandoms, political movements, lifestyle cults. You're promised identity in exchange for obedience, until your individual desires dissolve into the group's manufactured will. Foucault would say these aren't merely appetites being exploited. These are identities being constructed from scratch. When they control what you long for, they don't simply own your actions. They begin to own the architecture of your soul itself. This isn't about weakness or lack of willpower. This is about systems that have studied human psychology for centuries and discovered that the most effective prison isn't built from bars. It's built from the very desires that make you feel most alive. The trap was never meant to end with the moment you got what you wanted. That moment is just the hook. The real machinery begins the second after. You feel the rush fade. You reach for it again. And without realizing it, you've been trained to live only between craving and the brief relief of having it met. Foucault understood this better than anyone. Pleasure and discipline are not opposites. They are interlocking gears in the same machine. Pleasure keeps you docile. Discipline keeps you productive. Together, they form a loop that feels like life itself, but is in fact a circuit designed to drain you systematically. What you mistake for living is actually a form of sophisticated harvesting. A man who believes his satisfaction is freedom will never notice that the conditions of his hunger are being set by someone else. He will defend the very system that keeps him captive, because it is also the system that feeds him. And so the loop continues. Desire flares, the system offers the product, the rush fades, and the hunger returns, each cycle etching the chains deeper into his nervous system until resistance becomes unthinkable. The body learns to crave its own captivity. They don't need to threaten your body when they can command your appetite. The most perfect prison has no walls, no guards, and no lock. It lives inside you, in the way your heart races at a notification, in the way your mind drifts toward the next indulgence before the current one is finished. in the way you cannot bear the weight of an unsatisfied want for even moments. Your own biochemistry becomes the warden. Every empire that has lasted understood this fundamental principle. To control a people, you don't just govern their actions, you colonize their instincts. You map their hunger, you feed it just enough to keep it alive, and you make sure it never fully rests. You turn their biology into your surveillance system, their pleasure into your profit margin. The chain is invisible because it feels like you. It pulses with your heartbeat, thinks with your thoughts, wants with your wanting. It doesn't oppose your will, it becomes your will. And that's why breaking it requires something most people will never attempt: the willingness to question not just what you do, but what you desire itself. Because the moment you start examining your hungers instead of feeding them, the entire system begins to crack. If you felt trapped in this loop, there is something you need to hear before you sink further into self-blame. This is not weakness. This is the most human thing about you. The hunger for food, for touch, for connection, for recognition. It's older than language itself. It's the reason your ancestors survived long enough to pass you their blood. A brain that responds to desire is not broken. It is doing exactly what it was engineered to do across millions of years of evolution. That is why these chains work so devastatingly well. They're not forcing you to crave something unnatural. They're taking something essential and bending it until it serves their purposes instead of yours. The need to eat kept you alive when food was scarce, and death lurked behind every empty season. The longing for closeness kept your tribe bound together in the suffocating dark. The thirst for status made sure you fought to be seen, to matter, to secure a place in the hierarchy of survival. These drives are not character flaws. They are the original survival code written into your DNA. The danger emerges when you can no longer distinguish which hungers are authentically yours and which have been strategically planted. When your natural impulses have been cross-wired with manufactured triggers, your nervous system becomes incapable of distinguishing between what you genuinely need and what you've been systematically conditioned to chase. The wiring gets so tangled that you keep feeding the wrong hungers, mistaking exhaustion for fulfillment, mistaking artificial stimulation for genuine meaning. This is why breaking free does not start with suppressing desire. That's a war you will never win because you're fighting against your own biology. It starts with forensic recognition, with examining each hunger you feel and asking the surgical question: does this come from me, or was it placed here by forces that benefit from my craving? Would I still want this if no one had taught me to want it? If I stripped away every advertisement, every social pressure, every inherited expectation, what would remain? Jung understood that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The same principle applies to desire with even more devastating precision. Until you bring your hungers into the harsh light of examination, you will keep calling your chains freedom, your programming choice, your captivity liberation. There is a way to reclaim authentic desire, not by starving yourself of pleasure, but by becoming ruthlessly selective about which pleasures you will allow to feed you. And that choice begins the precise moment you can see the entire mechanism for what it truly is. Not your nature, but their architecture. There is a kind of man who moves through life as if on tracks he cannot see. Every step is already laid out for him. What he will eat, who he will love, what he will fear, when he will want it. He mistakes convenience for choice, routine for will, and the voice in his head for his own when in truth it was planted there decades ago by forces he has never consciously encountered. His meals are decided not by genuine hunger, but by what is most visible, most advertised, most precisely engineered to appear irresistible to his specific demographic profile. His affections are shaped by cultural trends, by romantic scripts, by ideals of attraction he never chose but now defends as if they emerged from his soul. His fears are borrowed wholesale from headlines and speeches, repeated until they crystallize into what feels like biological instinct. From the outside, He appears completely free. He laughs at jokes. He purchases products. He participates in conversations. But every movement of his existence is traced inside boundaries he did not draw, guided by hungers that were cultivated in him like crops. The desires that guide his choices are not his own, yet he protects them as if they were sacred, personal, irreplaceable. This is the end game of the system. Not a population in visible chains, but a population that cannot imagine life without their invisible restraints. When desire has been fully colonized, rebellion no longer feels dangerous. It feels pointless, even absurd. Why fight the very mechanisms that feed you exactly what you think you want? Foucault warned that power reaches its most dangerous form when it hides inside the structures we mistake for ourselves. At this advanced stage, no orders need to be issued. No threats need to be made explicit. The architecture of control has been so thoroughly internalized that it operates automatically. He disciplines himself. He hungers on schedule. He craves exactly what he is supposed to crave, when he is supposed to crave it, in the quantities that serve the system best. And the cruelest aspect, it operates in perfect silence. There is no dramatic oppression to spark righteous outrage, no clear villain to identify and topple, just the slow, methodical erosion of authentic agency, replaced by the soft, constant drip of ready-made pleasures that feel like personal discoveries. Perhaps this is precisely where you find yourself, not starving, not bleeding, but somehow fundamentally hollow. The days pass in predictable patterns. You consume, you sleep, you wake. You chase the same small satisfactions and call it living, call it progress, call it your life. This is the most dangerous psychological state a human being can enter. The state where the prison feels like home, where the cage feels like shelter. Because once that happens, there is nothing left to escape from, except yourself. The first step is not to destroy your desires. That is the lie that keeps people spiritually impotent, the fantasy of total detachment, of becoming some cold, untouchable being who no longer wants anything. Desire is not the enemy. What makes you a slave is forgetting who it belongs to, letting others hold the patent on your own hungers. Foucault understood that authentic autonomy begins the precise moment you stop letting others write your code of conduct, not only your moral framework, but your pleasure map. As long as your satisfactions are prepackaged and handed to you by corporate focus groups, you will always remain an extension of someone else's psychological design, a consumer rather than a creator of your own experience. Reappropriation is the deliberate act of taking back ownership over what genuinely stirs you. It is deciding, with surgical intent, which hungers you will feed and which you will systematically starve. It's not abstinence for the sake of moral purity, but conscious selection for the sake of personal power, for the reclamation of your own neural pathways. It can be brutally uncomfortable at first. When you cut away the pleasures that have been conditioning your responses for years, you will feel the absence like chemical withdrawal. The silence will itch under your skin. The empty space will demand to be filled with familiar stimulation. This is precisely where most people turn back, mistaking temporary discomfort for permanent loss. But that discomfort is the air returning to your lungs after years of breathing manufactured smoke. Begin by noticing the unconscious reflexes. The hand that reaches for the phone without conscious decision. The compulsive impulse to check if someone validated your post. The sudden craving for processed food you didn't think about until you saw targeted advertising. Each time, stop the automatic response. Ask yourself the surgical question: would I still want this if no one had systematically taught me to want it? You will start to discover new hungers, smaller, stranger, but undeniably yours. They might not look impressive to anyone else, might not generate social media content or impress your peer group. That's exactly the point. When you choose your pleasures with conscious deliberation, they stop functioning as tools of external control and transform into sources of authentic strength. This is not about rejecting the world or becoming a hermit. It's about refusing to let the world program your responses without your permission. And once you experience what it feels like to want on your own terms, to desire from your own center rather than from manufactured triggers, the chains you once defended will start to rust and crumble in your hands. Something fundamental shifts the moment you stop reacting to every manufactured lure. People notice. Even if they can't articulate what's changed, they sense a different gravitational field around you. You no longer jump when the notification pings with its engineered urgency. You don't rush to fill silences with compulsive noise. You stop chasing invitations that once felt like emotional lifelines but were actually just more threads in the web. And without the constant pull of manufactured hunger dragging at your attention, your presence becomes heavier, more deliberate, more unsettling to those who've forgotten what unmanipulated consciousness looks like. To those still trapped in the reactive cycle, this transformation feels like a personal attack. Your calm reads as defiance. Your refusal to play by the unspoken rules of constant consumption threatens the very psychological order they've built their identities upon. They might call you detached, arrogant, antisocial, or spiritually dead. But what they're really experiencing is the profound discomfort of witnessing someone live without the leash they've learned to love, defend, and mistake for freedom. There is a strange, almost magnetic power in this state. When you're not driven by the same programmed compulsions, you become genuinely unpredictable in ways that systems cannot account for. You cannot be steered with the usual psychological bait: approval, fear, artificial scarcity, manufactured envy. The emotional negotiations that once worked on you with mechanical precision now fall completely flat. And in a world designed for effortless manipulation, someone who can't be manipulated becomes a walking disruption to the established order. This doesn't mean retreating into isolation or becoming a hermit. You still eat, love, connect, achieve, participate in the world. But you do it entirely on your terms, with choices that emerge from your internal authority rather than from an algorithm, a billboard, or the hungry demands of a crowd. Each decision becomes a quiet act of resistance, not against society itself, but against the invisible machinery that attempts to run society through your unexamined instincts. Foucault would say, this is precisely where power flips its orientation. You stop being an object in someone else's system and become a subject in your own narrative. And subjects, unlike objects, cannot be owned, programmed, or controlled without their conscious participation. Some will try to pull you back into the familiar patterns. Others will try to study you, to decode your methods, to figure out how to break your focus and restore your reactivity. Most will eventually step aside, because the presence of someone genuinely unbound makes the bound feel their chains too sharply for comfort. You won't be invincible or untouchable, but you will be free enough to choose consciously what is worth being vulnerable for. And in a world where manufactured desire has become the ultimate master, that conscious choice represents the closest thing to real power that anyone can achieve. The hunger will never disappear completely. You could strip away every advertisement, every addictive technology, every manipulative voice telling you what to want, and still, deep in your bones, the primal pull would remain. Because desire is not an intruder that invaded your system. It is part of the fundamental architecture of being alive, woven into your DNA by millions of years of evolutionary pressure. The difference now is ownership. The invisible hands that once tugged at your impulses no longer reach you with the same mechanical precision. The manufactured cravings that used to steer your days like a remote control no longer get to drive your decisions. You still feel them moving through your nervous system, but now you choose consciously when and how to answer their call. This is not the impossible fantasy of a life without temptation or desire. It's the achievable reality of a life where temptation has lost its automatic command over your actions. You can walk through a marketplace of endless engineered pleasures, hear their seductive voices, feel their magnetic pull on your attention, and smile with genuine calm because you know exactly which ones deserve your time, your energy, your irreplaceable life force. Foucault would call this the creation of your own moral code, a private architecture of power that no external authority can dictate or override. Your pleasures transform from weapons of control into tools of conscious construction. They build you up instead of systematically hollowing you out, feed you instead of consuming you from within. And something remarkable happens when you live from this centered place. The very desires that once kept you psychologically enslaved begin to serve your authentic purposes. Hunger becomes laser focus. Attraction becomes conscious choice. Ambition becomes clear direction. The leash that once dragged you becomes a line you hold firmly in your own hands, leading precisely where you decide to go. You will still be fundamentally human. You will still stumble, still feel the sudden surge of wanting something you know will cost you more than it gives. But you will meet that critical moment with conscious awareness, not automatic obedience to programmed responses. And in that pause, in that precious sliver of freedom between the urge and the action, is the space where your entire life gets decided. The world will not stop trying to pull you back into the reactive loop. The machinery of manufactured desire doesn't shut down or give up. But once you've seen it clearly for what it truly is, once you've recognized the difference between authentic hunger and implanted craving, you can never again mistake the cage for the open sky. The hunger remains, but now it answers to you. If this resonates with something inside you, subscribe to the channel. This journey is just beginning.